Good afternoon, everyone. And yeah, so we're almost here to the end of today's sessions, and try and keep this presentation as simple as possible. I haven't used highly technical words and terminologies, so if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to discuss that this evening. Phytocapping, let's cap it. And I've been telling this for over a decade now, and I'm glad that it's now part of the guidelines, whether it's New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, or any other state. And they've been part of the guidelines for almost 5 years, 5 to 6 years, depending on which state you come from. Obviously, I'm going to be referring to the Victorian BEPM and bring some learnings and insights from my local government experience as manager waste with East Gippsland Shire, which I was just 5 months ago. During this time, I've worked on 4 phytocapping projects, which have been successfully designed and implemented. And I'll try and explain and highlight some of the key learnings and findings that we came across as a regional council dealing with the different aspects during the design construction, and the execution of the project. Obviously, phytocapping is one of my babies. I've been working on it for over a decade. And this is basically what phytocapping is. So are there anyone in this room who are actually planning to implement phytocaps or have implemented phytocaps? Gavin, from anyone else? So you're implementing, or you're in the process of design, construction, or design? So yeah, basically phytocapping, for people who haven't been reading about it or who don't know about it, is basically just growing perennial plants on required depth or recommended depth by the state government agencies to reduce water infiltration into buried waste. And it's a very simple and a very basic technology which works on a gross contribution of the soil and the trees. So basically this is the concept, and this is how the phytocapping system works. So when rain is received, part of the rain is held in the canopy of the trees, and the other part, the portion of water that actually reaches the ground surface, is stored in the surface of the soil, similar to biocovers, and the rest is taken back by the trees, the different tree species, in the form of transpiration. So this is a gross hydrological balance that is this technique basically works on, and this is how it is grossly removing water infiltration. But one of the major factors, if you read the guidelines, it doesn't talk about the vegetation as much as it should. Whether you take the Victorian guidelines or the New South Wales guidelines, or it does talk about that vegetation should be carefully selected and so on and so forth. But before going into the design stage, it's very important for every landfill operator who is thinking of phytocapping their landfill cells is to basically look into the rainfall, which is very essential, which is the most important factor that we are all working towards to reduce the rainfall infiltration into buried waste. And also look at the tree species, how much of interception occurs with those species. Obviously, you need specialized skills. You might want to have a plant physiologist or plant specialist who comes and gives that insight on canopy interception. And of course, we have to consider soil evaporation and transpiration before we actually calculate and make sure that phytocapping actually works in your region. So it's very important for every one of us to understand the concept, and we need to assess the pros and cons, and also assess and determine whether the system actually is going to work in the long term or within your regions. And for that, the rule of thumb is the potential evapotranspiration. If it is higher than average rainfall, then the phytocapping system will work. I know the guideline says evaporation, but the rule of thumb is potential evapotranspiration and not just evaporation that needs to be factored in. So it's one of the very important factors that we need to assess and also determine before we actually go on to the next phase of doing the costings and the design of it. So make sure that the potential evapotranspiration is calculated and compared against your annual rainfall. The second aspect is obviously the soil, which is another important aspect, a component of phytocapping. So soil is not cheap. And if you do have, and you've done your analysis, your pre-qualification modeling and testing, the second step is to get your soil source and also make sure that you're accumulating and stockpiling your soil well in advance for the phytocapping to occur. So it's something that it's an ongoing thing, and it can commence 2 years prior to the actual design and construction stage. And in that way, phytocapping can be worthwhile and probably cost-effective. Pre-qualification tests and modeling are part of the pre-approval, whether you go to the EPA, so to get an approval, you want to do a business case on you want to phytocap as against conventional capping, you give your reasoning. So it's very important that you do your pre-qualification tests, and to get that pre-qualification test, you need to do the series of tests for soil and also the modeling to make sure that the drainage or the seepage is actually within the limit that is recommended by the EPA. So use the right model, use the right, and select the contractors who are aware of this technology, who understand the concept. And very importantly, the input that goes into these modeling, they need to factor in evaporation, transpiration, canopy interception, surface runoff, and deep drainage. So those are the inputs that need to be carefully considered while modeling. The other one is obviously the business case. Once you have the modeling done and you have reasonable data to present to the EPA and a business case, so you present it to the EPA for approval and discuss the concept with relevant departments within your council, basically, because it's not just about engineering, or it's not just about waste. The ongoing operations will involve parks and gardens to maintain the facility, and so on and so forth. So there's an open space strategy. Your council might have open space strategy. What do you want to do? What is your end use of this site? So you might want to discuss these things with your strategic planners as well. So that's another thing that get involved and engage with the other departments, and of course the community as well. On approval from the EPA, so there's a pre-designed checklist that is very important. One is the proposed master plan. Of course, what is the end use of this site? Is it going to be recreational? Now, two of the sites that we did in East Gippsland have walking trails, dog off-leash parks, mountain bike tracks, and observatory decks. So they are all ongoing operational costs, but it's very important that these things are discussed and incorporated in the design before it goes to the EPA. And ascertain the depth of the interim cap, because that can create a lot of complexity, especially with the capping. And there'll be a lot of additional work that may incur a lot more cost than expected. So it's very important you understand your site, the thickness of your interim cap, and the area of the site that needs to be capped to phytocapped. As I said, the technology has been in place for quite some time, but obviously the concept and the process is still very much in its infant stages, where there's a lot of questions, a lot of unknowns, a lot of unforeseen circumstances that come during the process of design, construction, and execution of these phytocaps. So make sure that when you engage an auditor, basically what we have in Victoria and New South Wales, that the auditors have worked on similar projects and understand the intricacies and the complexities of the project. And also, at the same time, make a list of all your geotechnical investigation and testing authority, GETA, so that they understand the CQA plan, the amount of testing required, the frequency of testing required, because they're going to be on site with your project officers 7 days a week through the completion of this phase, the stage of the project. And it's going to cost a lot of money. So it's very important to understand their role and their involvement and the cost that's going to be incurred by council to engage a GETA. At the design phase, I think it's very important that the council goes with, or anyone who's planning to have a Phytocap at a landfill site, to basically go on with their master plan and explain what they want to do and what they intend to do with their site after it's capped. Thoroughly check the lysimeter design, because that's something will be an ongoing testing and monitoring requirement. It's part of the EPA requirement. In New South Wales, it's up to 3 years, and then 5 and 10. In Victoria, it's up to 5 years. But one thing that needs to be considered and bear in mind is the trees close canopies only at the age of 2 or 3. So you're not going to get any results in the first 2 and 3 years. So that's something you might want to bring it up with your EPA officers and explain it to them, and have a flexible arrangement in terms of monitoring, which could be done. The construction quality assurance plan, it's the core of this project. Basically, it details each and every module and regime of the construction of the Phytocap. What needs to be done, how many tests needs to be done, what sort of tests to be done. So it's very important for council to, or anyone who is involved in this project, to give a thorough read before you actually say yes to the auditor. So that's something will govern your costing. So the only chances where you can make your amendments to your costing and is to basically through your CQA plan, which will basically, you can be flexible there. You can reduce the frequency of testing. You could reduce the level 1 supervision if required, which is basically done by GETA. You could say, one of the council officers will be involved in taking those tests, so you are reducing costs in that aspect. So the CQA plan must be read very well before you get into the EPA, before making it to the EPA. Obviously, the selection of plans and the rehab plan is very important, and it goes as part of the design to the EPA for approval. And we all know that the guidelines say that selection of plants are very important, but it's very important to select the right kind of species with the right transpiration rate, or right and fast-growing species that will close canopy within 1 to 2 years' time, so that your cost phytocapping is effective. And also try and choose native species. So you could use your local state agencies, Wick Forest, or any state agencies, local agencies, to give some, provide some guidance on that. Or if you have your own staff members, get them involved. They could provide some really valuable insight on plants and selection of species. As I said, raise all the queries, changes, and prior to the document that is submitted to the EPA. It is very important, because once the EPA approves it, it's going to go as a variation to your existing approval. So, and it delays the process. And delaying the process means extending the project and timelines, and it can cost council and anyone involved in this project. So, as I said, soil is important, but there needs to be emphasis on vegetation, and I strongly emphasize that vegetation is given equal importance as much as soil is given importance in the guidelines, and it's very important. And selecting the right kind of tree species can reduce a lot of load, and it can improve the productivity and the performance of phytocaps. There will be some flexibility, and there are some flexibility around making practical suggestions to your proposed design. If you think there are some solutions and suggestions that will reduce the overall cost of capping, make those suggestions and take it to the EPA, discuss it with your auditor, design auditor, and the EPA. And it's very important that you keep EPA ahead of, informed of your changes, and give them reasoning as to why you're doing it and how you're going to do it and how you're going to compensate for all these changes. For example, we had our CQA plan done for one of our site in Bairnsdale for Bosworth Road, which is a 100,000 square meter site which is being constructed at the moment. And when you have 100,000 square meter site, and the CQA plan says that you have to do all the soil tests and different soil tests for every 5,000 square meters. If you put that into perspective, it's a huge amount. And the amount of time the GITA, the Geotechnical Investigation Testing Authority, spends on site on a daily basis, you're actually spending $1,200 to $1,500 per day for the GITA to be present on site. So that's the kind of factors need to be considered, need to be discussed, and it could be relaxed. It could, these things are flexible, and I'm sure EPA will work with you, because they have worked with us in our case, and they've been very good in terms of making minor changes prior to the design being approved. Once we have the design approved, the next stage is obviously going for the construction tender, which is again a very interesting process. There are not many earth-moving companies or civil engineering companies who have done Phytocaps. It's a new concept for them as well. So it's good to have someone who specializes in it to give some insight earlier on. Very importantly, make sure that you've done the modeling for the soil requirement, because once you have your soil stockpile for capping and you bring different sets of soil from different sources, it's a different ballgame, and it really gets complex, and it goes through the whole saga of getting the soil tested in the analysis, because the homogeneity is not, and it's not complying with the initial soil that was approved by EPA. So make sure that you have the same soil and enough soil for constructing the cap over the period of construction and execution. Obviously, as part of our Phytocaps, we've tried and used all the mulch which was processed within the Shire for rehab purpose. So we basically made 100 mil of mulch. So make sure that you have enough mulch on site, if not within the region, so that it can be carted at any time. And ensure all data information on waste interim cap is accurate and modeled to avoid any unforeseen situations costs. Do thorough analysis of soil, plant, so that you get things right in the first time. And one important thing that we put in our tender is contractor to supply seedlings, and make sure that the planting of the seedlings is not done just as part of the construction, but we need the right time and the right month to plant seedlings, so which can be discussed with your Parks and Gardens crew, which may not be as part of the construction tender. It may be a different time to the construction. And also make sure that the tender is, you put in the tender for the contractor to replace any plants that have not survived for 1 year later. So those are the things that you need to consider. Okay, obviously there's a few things which I've already mentioned. Just with the costing of, from our experience, a conventional cap on an average costs around $100 a square meter, as opposed to a Phytocap on an average costs around $35 to $60, depending on where the soil comes from, how far is it. Ongoing lysimeter for 5 years, that's in Victoria, but obviously in New South Wales it's 3 plus 5 plus 10, so that is an ongoing cost. ongoing weeding and maintenance, and obviously irrigation for 12 months. These are some factors that needs to be costed in when you're proposing for Phytocap. Test requirements. These are some basic test requirements for Phytocaps. And in summary, basically understand the concept, get it right, involve the right people early on so that you don't have any unforeseen circumstances and complexities. Undertake a complete cost analysis prior to making a decision to Phytocap, because Phytocap is not always the cheaper option. Get the pre-qualification test right, get the modeling done, get the right input into the model. Include all the plant parameters like canopy interception, transpiration, etc. And of course, tree selection is important. As I said, vegetation in the system is as important as soil depth. It's a great community project. It gives a lot of value, and it creates a brand image for councils, which it has done for East Gippsland Shire, so it's been fantastic. So these are some slides of photographs, just the photographs to end my presentation. This is the Malakuta landfill, which is phytocapped. We still not planted the seedlings, and this was done when I was the manager of waste at Malakuta just 5 months ago. So this is the Orbos landfill, which is being phytocapped. This is the Bosworth Road landfill, which I mentioned, which is 100,000 square meter, which is a licensed landfill, and it's been phytocapped with 1.5 meter soil and more than 60,000 tree species, which has walking trails, mountain bike tracks, observatory decks, and dog off-leash park. So this is one of the most sought-after project in East Gippsland at the moment. So that's some of the photos and that's a lysimeter test pad that's being constructed at the Bosworth Road landfill site. Yeah, and there's another photo from an aerial view, and that's all about my presentation on phytocapping, and that basic factors and details that need to be considered, pre-design, during design, post-design, and construction. My special thanks to East Gippsland Shire Council, and thank you.